Claire's hands tremble as she reads the text that will end her 13-year marriage. Upstairs, evidence of her afternoon with the plumber still lingers in her sheets. Her phone buzzes. Richard is typing back. Everything she's built is about to shatter, and there's no going back now. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The morning Claire Whitmore called about the broken pipe in her guest bathroom. She had no idea her carefully constructed life was about to crack wide open. She stood in her pristine kitchen, marble countertops gleaming under recessed lighting, her reflection caught in the polished chrome of the refrigerator. Blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, yoga pants that cost more than some people's rent, a diamond ring that caught the light with every movement of her hand. Everything in place, everything perfect, everything empty. Her husband Richard had left for his business trip to Singapore at dawn, barely kissing her cheek before his town car arrived. 13 years of marriage, and somewhere along the way, they'd become polite strangers sharing an address. She couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at her, really seen her as anything more than the appropriate accessory to his hedge fund executive lifestyle. The plumber arrived exactly on time. Claire watched through the front window as a dark blue van pulled into her circular driveway. The words, Morrison & Sons Plumbing, painted on the side in professional lettering. She opened the door before he could ring the bell, not wanting to disturb the cathedral silence of her empty house. He was not what she expected. Tall, powerfully built, with deep brown skin that seemed to absorb and reflect the morning sunlight all at once. He wore work clothes that fit him well, carrying a metal toolbox with an ease that suggested strength held carefully in check. When he smiled, it was genuine, reaching his warm brown eyes in a way that made something in Claire's chest tighten unexpectedly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Darius Morrison. I'm here about your plumbing issue." His voice was rich, textured, with a slight southern lilt that felt like warm honey. Claire found herself staring a moment too long before catching herself. "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. It's upstairs, in the guest bathroom." She led him through her house, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the sound of his work boots on her hardwood floors, the faint scent of soap and something cedar-like that followed him. The house suddenly felt smaller, warmer, charged with an energy she couldn't name. In the bathroom, water had indeed leaked through the ceiling from the pipes above, leaving a dark stain and a steady drip into the strategically placed bucket she'd positioned earlier. Darius set down his toolbox and examined the damage, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness as he tested the wet drywall. "This has been going on for a while," he said, not accusingly, just stating fact. "Probably weeks, maybe months. These old houses, they hide their problems until they can't anymore." Claire felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she wasn't sure why his words felt like they meant something more. "My husband usually handles these things, but he's been traveling a lot lately." "Traveling a lot," Darius repeated softly, still examining the ceiling. "And leaving you here alone in this big house." It wasn't a question. It was an observation that landed with unexpected weight. "I'll need to access the pipes from above," he continued, standing to his full height. "There's probably a crawl space or an attic access point. The damage here is just the symptom. The real problem is hidden." Again, his words seemed to echo with meanings Claire didn't want to examine. She showed him to the hallway access panel, watching as he pulled down the ladder with ease, his shoulders flexing beneath his work shirt. He climbed up into the darkness above, and Claire found herself standing at the bottom of the ladder, listening to the sounds of him moving around, the creak of old wood, the clink of tools. "Mrs. Whitmore," his voice came down from above. "I'm going to need you to come up here for a minute. I need you to see something." Claire's heart did something strange in her chest. Up there? Yeah, it's safe. Just watch your step on the ladder. She climbed carefully, her hands gripping the wooden rungs, aware of how vulnerable she felt ascending into the dim space above. Darius's hand appeared strong and steady, offering to help her up the last step. When she took it, his palm was warm and calloused against hers, and the contact sent an unexpected current through her entire body. The attic was cramped and dusty, with afternoon light filtering through a small window at the far end. Darius had set up a work light that cast dramatic shadows across the exposed pipes and wooden beams. He guided her carefully over to where he'd been working, his hand barely touching the small of her back, yet she felt that touch like a brand. See this? He pointed to a section of old copper piping that showed obvious corrosion and small leaks. This is the source. It's been deteriorating for years, probably. Every time water runs through here, it's been seeping out slowly, quietly, causing damage you couldn't see until it was serious. Claire stared at the pipe, but she was intensely aware of how close they were standing in the confined space, how the heat of the attic made the air feel thick and charged, how when she breathed, she could smell that cedar scent more strongly now, mixed with honest sweat and something essentially masculine that made her lightheaded. How do you fix something like this? Her voice came out softer than she intended. Darius turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the attic, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You have to replace the whole section. You can't just patch it up and hope for the best. Sometimes you have to tear out what's not working anymore and put in something new, something that actually does what it's supposed to do. The silence that followed stretched between them like a living thing. Claire could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Darius didn't look away, and she found she couldn't either. How long will that take? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Depends on how thorough you want me to be. His voice had dropped lower, become somehow more textured. I could do a quick patch job, get you through a few more months, or I could do it right, really right, take my time and make sure everything is solid, strong, the way it should be. That would take most of the day. My husband won't be back until next week. I know. Those two words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Claire knew she should step back, should climb down the ladder, should maintain the appropriate distance between a married woman and the man she'd hired to fix her pipes. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. Do it right, she heard herself say. Take your time, make sure it's done properly. Something flickered in Darius's eyes, a heat that made her knees feel weak. Yes, ma'am, I'll give you exactly what you need. He held her gaze for one more long moment, then turned back to the pipes, and Claire carefully made her way back down the ladder, her legs shaking slightly, her whole body thrumming with something she refused to name. Downstairs, she tried to busy herself, but she was acutely aware of every sound from above. The clank of pipes being removed, the low rumble of Darius's voice as he spoke to himself while working, the creak of floorboards as he moved around. Around noon, he came down, his shirt clinging to him from the heat and exertion of working in the cramped attic space. Claire had been in the kitchen, pretending to organize her already immaculate pantry. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to run to the supply house to get the replacement piping. The corrosion is worse than I thought. I'll need about an hour. Of course. Can I get you something to drink before you go? Water, iced tea. Iced tea would be wonderful, thank you. She poured him a tall glass, her hands not quite steady, and when she handed it to him, their fingers brushed again. He drank deeply, and she found herself watching his throat work as he swallowed, found herself thinking thoughts that made heat pool low in her belly. "This is a beautiful home," he said, setting down the empty glass. "But it feels lonely. A house this big needs life in it. Laughter, energy. Seems like a waste for it to be so quiet." "I'm used to quiet," Claire said, though even as she spoke, she realized how untrue that was. She wasn't used to it. She hated it. The quiet was suffocating. "No one gets used to being lonely, Mrs. Whitmore. They just get better at pretending they don't feel it." His words cracked something open inside her, and to her horror she felt tears prick at her eyes. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see. "I'm sorry," Darius said softly, and she heard him move closer. "That was too personal. It's none of my business." "No," Claire managed, her voice thick. "No, you're right. You're absolutely right." When she turned back, he was closer than she expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Close enough that if she just leaned forward slightly... "I should go get those supplies," he said, but he didn't move. "Yes," she whispered, "you should." Neither of them moved. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, thrumming with possibility and danger. Claire could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could feel every nerve in her body alive and singing. 13 years of being ignored, of being treated like furniture, of sleeping in a bed next to a man who never reached for her anymore, never looked at her like she was desirable, like she was a woman with needs and wants, and a body that could feel. "Mrs. Whitmore," Darius said, his voice rough now, strained, "if I don't leave right now, I'm not going to be able to." "Then maybe you shouldn't." The words were out before she could stop them, before her rational mind could intervene. They hung in the air between them like a confession, like a prayer, like a plea. Darius closed his eyes briefly, and she could see the war happening behind his face, the battle between what he wanted and what was right, between desire and restraint. "You don't mean that," he said finally, opening his eyes. "You're just lonely, and I'm here. But tomorrow when the work is done and I'm gone, you'll still be Mrs. Whitmore in this big house, and you'll regret saying things you can't take back." His words should have stung, should have felt like rejection. Instead, they felt like grace, like he was protecting her from herself, and somehow that made her want him even more. "What if I wouldn't regret it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What if I've been regretting my whole life, all the chances I didn't take, all the times I stayed silent and appropriate and good? What if I'm tired of being good?" Claire. He said her first name for the first time, and it sounded like music, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. "If we start something, if we open this door, there's no closing it again. You understand that? Your life will change. Everything will change. Maybe I want everything to change." They stood there, frozen in that moment of decision, of possibility, of terrible, wonderful choice. Outside, a bird sang in the magnolia tree. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed. The world continued its ordinary turning while inside Claire's kitchen, her entire existence balanced on a knife's edge. Darius reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back, to change her mind, to remember her vows and her marriage and the life she'd built. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lips with a gentleness that made her tremble. "I'm gonna go get those supplies now," he said softly. "And while I'm gone, I want you to really think about this. Think about what you're asking for, because if I come back and you're still sure, if you still look at me the way you're looking at me right now." He paused, his eyes dark with promise. "Then I'm going to give you exactly what you've been missing. I'm going to show you what it feels like to be truly seen, truly wanted, truly satisfied. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Claire nodded, unable to speak, her whole body vibrating with anticipation and fear and desperate, aching need. And Mrs. Whitmore? He leaned in, his lips so close to her ear that she could feel his breath. When I'm done, you'll never settle for less again. That marriage of yours, that polite, cold arrangement, it'll be impossible to go back to. So you better be real sure this is what you want. Then he stepped back, picked up his toolbox, and walked out her front door, leaving her standing alone in her perfect kitchen, her whole world tilting on its axis. The hour he was gone felt like an eternity. Claire paced through her house, her mind racing, her body humming with nervous energy. She could call him, tell him not to come back, hire a different plumber to finish the job. She could pretend this morning had never happened, could shore up the walls of her appropriate life and continue on as she had been. But even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't. Couldn't. Because Darius had seen something in her that Richard had stopped seeing years ago. He'd looked at her like she was a woman, desirable and alive, not just a decorative element in his carefully curated life. He'd spoken to her like she had thoughts and feelings that mattered, like her loneliness and hunger were real and valid, not character flaws to be ignored. She went upstairs to her bedroom, the one she rarely shared with her husband anymore. They'd fallen into a pattern where he stayed up late, working in his home office, then slept in the guest room so as not to disturb her. In 13 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the number of times in the last 5 years that Richard had initiated any form of physical intimacy. And even then, it had been perfunctory, mechanical, something to be gotten through rather than enjoyed. She'd thought it was her, thought she'd become unattractive, undesirable, boring. She'd tried everything. New lingerie, romantic dinners, frank conversations that went nowhere. Richard had always had an excuse. Work stress, fatigue, age, low testosterone, anything but the truth. She was beginning to see clearly now. He simply didn't want her. But Darius did. The way he'd looked at her, the restraint she'd seen him exercise, the promise in his voice when he'd told her what he'd do if she was sure, that was desire. That was want. That was a man who saw her as a woman worth having. Claire looked at herself in the full-length mirror. At 41, she'd kept herself in shape through yoga and running, more out of habit than any real hope that anyone would notice. Her blonde hair still shone, her body was still toned beneath her expensive casual clothes. Her face showed only the first hints of aging around her eyes and mouth. She wasn't young anymore, but she wasn't old either. She was a woman in her prime, being wasted on a man who couldn't be bothered to notice. She heard the van pull back into her driveway. Her heart leapt into her throat. This was it. The moment of decision. She could meet him at the door, thank him professionally, stand back and let him finish the plumbing work as just that, work. Or she could meet him at the door and show him with her eyes, her body, her presence that her answer was yes. Claire took a deep breath, ran her hands through her hair to let it fall loose around her shoulders, and walked downstairs. She opened the door before he could knock. Darius stood on her threshold, supplies in hand, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. She didn't speak. She simply stepped back, holding the door open wider, holding his gaze, letting him see everything she couldn't say out loud. "You're sure?" he said, not a question. "I'm sure." He set down the supplies carefully inside the doorway, then slowly, deliberately closed and locked the door behind him. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt final, irrevocable, like sealing themselves away from the outside world and all its rules and expectations. "No more pretending after this," he said, his voice low and serious. "No going back to acting like you're satisfied with scraps of affection. No more lying to yourself about what you need." "I know. And your husband? That marriage? It's been over for years. We just haven't admitted it." Darius nodded slowly, then took a step toward her. Claire's breath quickened. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, and just that simple touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "I'm going to finish the plumbing first," he said, and she must have made a sound of protest because he smiled, a slow, promising smile that made her knees weak. "Because I'm going to take my time with you, Claire. I'm not going to rush this, and I don't want you thinking about leaking pipes or water damage or anything else when I finally put my hands on you. I want your complete attention." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers, and the old-fashioned gesture was somehow more intimate than anything she'd experienced in years. "Besides," he continued, his voice dropping to a rumble that she felt in her bones, "anticipation is half the pleasure. By the time I'm done fixing what's broken up there, you're going to be so ready for me that the slightest touch will make you tremble." He was right. She was already trembling. Darius went back to work, but everything felt different now. Claire tried to occupy herself, but she found herself drawn back to the hallway, listening to the sounds of him working above. Every so often he would come down to get more tools or materials, and each time their eyes would meet, the air between them crackling with promise and anticipation. Around 3 in the afternoon, he came down covered in dust and sweat. "I need to wash up," he said. "Is there a bathroom I can use?" Claire's mouth felt dry. "You can use the master bath, upstairs, last door on the right." She watched him climb the stairs, her heart pounding. She heard the water running, pictured him in her bathroom, washing away the day's work. When he emerged 15 minutes later, he'd cleaned up, his shirt damp in places where he'd splashed water, his face fresh. He found her in the kitchen, where she'd been attempting and failing to focus on preparing a cup of tea she didn't want. "The pipework is done," he said, leaning against the door frame. "Everything's solid now, properly sealed, strong. No more leaks, no more hidden damage. It'll last for years." "Thank you," Claire managed, "but there's something else that needs attention." He pushed off the door frame and walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Something that's been neglected for far too long. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, could smell his clean, masculine scent. He reached out and tucked a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear, his fingers trailing down the side of her face with aching gentleness. "Tell me what you want, Claire. I need to hear you say it." Her voice came out as a whisper. "I want to feel alive again. I want to feel like a woman, not a piece of furniture. I want..." She swallowed hard. "I want to know what it's like to be with someone who actually wants me." "Oh, I want you," Darius said, his voice rough. "I've wanted you since I walked through your door this morning. Wanted to know what it would feel like to make you smile, really smile. Wanted to hear what sounds you'd make when someone took their time with you. Paid attention to you. Worshipped you the way you deserve." His hand slid from her face to her neck, his thumb resting against her racing pulse. 13 years, he said softly. 13 years you've been in a marriage that doesn't feed you, doesn't fulfill you. That's a long time to go hungry, Claire. She couldn't speak, could only nod. "I'm gonna feed you," he promised, his eyes dark with intent. "I'm gonna give you everything you've been craving, everything you've been denied. And when I'm done, you're gonna understand just how much you've been missing." His hand tightened slightly on her neck, not threatening, just possessive, claiming. But I need you to understand something. The number 13. That's unlucky in some cultures. Did you know that? 13 years of bad luck, of neglect, of slowly dying inside that perfect life of yours. But I'm going to change that number's meaning for you. By the time this day is over, 13 is going to mean something completely different. Claire's breath hitched. What will it mean? Darius leaned in, his lips nearly touching her ear. It's going to be the number of times I make you come apart in my hands. The number of times I show you what your body is capable of feeling. The number of times I prove to you that you're not broken. You haven't lost anything. You've just been with the wrong man. A sound escaped her throat. Half gasp, half moan, and she felt Darius smile against her ear. That's the first one, he murmured, just from words, just from the promise of what's coming. You're so starved for attention, for desire, that just knowing someone wants you is enough to make you respond. His hand slid down to her waist, pulling her against him, and she could feel the solid reality of his desire pressing against her. Feel that? He said, his voice strained now, his control starting to fray. That's what you do to me. That's how much I want you. And I'm going to spend the rest of this afternoon and into the evening showing you exactly how good it can be when someone actually cares about your pleasure, actually pays attention to what makes you respond, actually takes their time instead of treating you like an inconvenience. Claire's hands came up to grip his shoulders, needing something to hold on to as the world spun around her. Please, she whispered, not even sure what she was begging for. Please what, Claire? Tell me. Say it. Please. She took a shuddering breath. Please show me. Show me what I've been missing. Show me what it's supposed to feel like. Darius pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hand still firm on her waist. Are you absolutely certain? Because once we start, once I put my hands on you with intention, there's no pretending this didn't happen. No going back to your empty marriage and convincing yourself you're satisfied. Are you ready for your life to change? Claire thought about her cold, lonely bed, about Richard's perfunctory kisses on the cheek before he left for his trips, about the years of feeling invisible, unwanted, slowly fading into the background of her own life, about the weight of diamond rings and empty promises. Yes, she said firmly, I'm ready. I'm so ready. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Darius's eyes. Then let me take care of you, Claire. Let me show you what it feels like to be treasured. He lifted her easily, his strength undeniable, and carried her toward the stairs. Claire wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart racing, her body already responding to his touch, to his voice, to the promise of what was to come. As he carried her up the stairs toward her bedroom, toward the bed she'd slept in alone for so many nights, toward a future that looked nothing like the past 13 years, Claire felt something inside her chest crack open, something that had been locked away, protected, hidden behind walls of propriety and duty and being good. It felt like breaking. It felt like freedom. And when Darius laid her down on her bed and looked at her with eyes that held desire and respect and genuine care, when his hands began their slow exploration of her body with a reverence that made tears spring to her eyes, when he whispered promises against her skin about all the ways he was going to make her feel, Claire realized that Darius had been right. The number 13 was about to take on a whole new meaning, and her life, her carefully constructed, appropriate, empty life, was never going to be the same again. The late afternoon sun cast golden streams through the bedroom windows, painting everything in warm amber light. Claire lay wrapped in sheets that suddenly felt different against her skin. Silk that had always been there, but that she was feeling for the first time. Really feeling. Every fiber against nerve endings that seemed newly awakened. Darius sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her, his powerful shoulders rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. The intimacy of watching him in this unguarded moment felt almost more vulnerable than everything that had just passed between them. Claire's body still hummed with sensation, with the proof that she was not broken, not undesirable, not any of the things she'd begun to believe about herself. 13. He'd kept his promise. 13 times he'd brought her to the edge and over, each one different, each one revealing something new about her own capacity for pleasure, for response, for being present in her own body instead of floating somewhere outside herself. 13 times he'd proven that the problem had never been her. She watched as he reached for his shirt, and without thinking, she sat up, letting the sheet fall away. "Wait," she said softly. Darius turned to look at her, and the expression on his face, tender, protective, still hungry, made her breath catch all over again. Claire struggled to find the words. "I need you to know that this wasn't just about the physical for me. I know that's how it might seem, and maybe that's all it was supposed to be. But somewhere between this morning and right now, something changed inside me. You changed something inside me." Darius set his shirt down and turned fully toward her, giving her his complete attention in a way that Richard never had. "Tell me what changed," he said gently. Claire pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, suddenly feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her bare skin. "For years, I've felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming less real, less substantial, like I was fading into the wallpaper of my own life. And I blame myself. I thought I was the problem, that I wasn't interesting enough, passionate enough, woman enough to hold my husband's attention." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you looked at me today like I was the most captivating thing you'd ever seen. You touched me like I was precious. You listened when I spoke, like my words actually mattered. And I realized, I'm not the one who's been failing. I've just been in a relationship where I was never really seen." Darius reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Claire, you are captivating. You are precious. And your words do matter. Any man who can't see that is blind." "Richard's not a bad person," Claire said, needing to be fair despite everything. We're just wrong for each other. We always have been. We got married because it looked right on paper, because our families approved, because it was what we were supposed to do. But we never had what you and I found in just one afternoon. That spark, that connection, that feeling of being truly present with another person." She looked down at their joined hands, his so much darker than hers, and marveled at how right it felt. "I spent 13 years trying to make something work that was fundamentally broken from the start. And I think, deep down, Richard knows it too. We've been acting out roles in a play neither of us wanted to be in anymore." "What are you going to do?" Darius asked quietly. Claire took a deep breath. "I'm going to be honest. With Richard, with myself, about all of it. I can't go back to pretending. You showed me what it feels like to be truly alive, truly wanted, truly myself. I can't unknow that now." She looked up and met his eyes. "But I need you to understand. I'm not asking you to rescue me or solve my problems or be my escape plan. Whatever happens next with my marriage, with my life, that's mine to figure out. I don't want you to feel responsible for the choices I make." "You're thinking too loud," Darius said softly, glancing back at her with a gentle smile. "I can practically hear the wheels turning." Claire pulled the sheet higher, suddenly shy, despite everything they'd just shared. "I'm trying to figure out what happens now." Darius turned fully to face her, his expression serious. "What happens now is you make a choice, a real one. Not the choice you made when you were 28 and thought marriage to a successful man was the same thing as happiness. Not the choice you've been making every day for 13 years by staying in something that doesn't feed you, but a real choice about what you actually want your life to look like." "It's not that simple," Claire protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "I have a life, responsibilities, a reputation, Richard's family, our friends, the country club, the charity boards I sit on." "All the pretty cages you've built around yourself," Darius said, not unkindly. "I know it's complicated, Claire. I know you can't just walk away from 13 years of your life like it never happened, but you also can't unhappen this. You can't unfeel what you just felt, and you can't pretend anymore that you're okay with a marriage that makes you this lonely." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I'm not asking you to leave your husband for me, or burn down your whole life today. But I am asking you to be honest with yourself about what you need and whether you're getting it." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "What if I don't know what I need? What if I've been pretending for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore?" "Then that's what you figure out," Darius said gently. "But you start by admitting the truth. You're not happy. Your marriage isn't working, and you deserve more than what you've been settling for." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Darius caught it with his thumb, his touch achingly tender. "Hey," he said softly, "I didn't come here to make you cry. I came to fix your pipes." That surprised a laugh out of her, watery but genuine. "Well, you certainly did that. Among other things," he said with a small smile. Then his expression turned serious again. "Claire, I want you to know something. This wasn't just scratching an itch for me. I didn't just see a lonely, beautiful woman and think easy opportunity. What happened between us? It meant something. You mean something." Claire's breath caught. "Darius, let me finish," he said. "I know I'm the plumber. I know you're the lady in the big house with the rich husband and the perfect life. I know how this looks from the outside, but I also know what I felt when I touched you, when I made you laugh, when I watched you come alive under my hands. That was real. All of it was real." He squeezed her hand gently. "So I'm going to give you my number. And when you figure out what you want, when you're ready to be honest with yourself and with your husband about the state of your marriage, I want you to call me. Not for this," he gestured to the bed, "though God knows I'd love to touch you again, but because I'd like to take you to dinner. I'd like to talk to you without walls and secrets between us. I'd like to get to know who Claire is when she's not pretending to be Mrs. Richard Whitmore." Claire stared at him, this man who had walked into her life just hours ago and somehow seen straight through to the core of her, to the parts of herself she'd been hiding even from herself. "What if I'm too scared?" she whispered. "What if I call you and then realize I can't actually leave my marriage, can't actually blow up my whole life?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Darius said. "I'm not asking for promises you can't keep, Claire. I'm just asking you not to disappear back into that empty life and pretend this never happened. Whatever comes next, whatever you decide, I want you to decide it honestly. Deal?" "Deal," Claire managed, her voice thick with emotion. Darius stood and began dressing, his movements efficient and practiced. Claire watched him, memorizing the lines of his body, the way he moved, wanting to hold on to this moment, this feeling, for as long as possible. When he was fully dressed, he pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on her nightstand. My personal cell is on there. Not the company number, mine. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture so sweet and protective that it made fresh tears well in Claire's eyes. Take care of yourself, Claire Whitmore. And remember, you're not broken. You never were. You just needed someone to show you that. But before he could pull away completely, Claire grabbed his hand. Wait. Before you go, I need to ask you something. Darius sat back down on the edge of the bed, his full attention on her once more. Why me? Claire asked, her voice small. You could have any woman you want. You're successful, attractive, kind. Why would you risk getting involved with a married woman? Why would you care about someone like me? Darius was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. You want the truth? When I first saw you this morning, standing in your doorway in your expensive clothes and your expensive house, I made assumptions. I thought you'd be like most of my wealthy clients, distant, treating me like the help, barely acknowledging my presence beyond giving instructions. He smiled slightly. But then you offered me iced tea. Not because you had to, but because you're genuinely kind. And when you thanked me, you looked me in the eye. You saw me as a person, not just a service provider. That's rarer than you think, especially in neighborhoods like this. That's just basic decency, Claire protested. Exactly. And it's something I don't encounter as often as you'd think. Then when we were in the attic and I explained about the pipes, I watched your face. You weren't just nodding politely. You were actually listening, actually interested. And I could see something else too. Loneliness. Deep, bone-aching loneliness. The kind that comes from being surrounded by everything but feeling empty inside. Darius looked down at their joined hands. I recognized it because I've been there. After my divorce 5 years ago, I threw myself into work, into being successful, into proving I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I was lonely. It took me a long time to admit that success and money and a nice house don't mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with, someone who actually sees you. You were married? Claire asked, surprised he hadn't mentioned it before. For 8 years. Her name was Nicole. She was beautiful, ambitious, perfect on paper. But we wanted different things. She wanted the lifestyle, the big house, the fancy cars, the country club membership. I wanted partnership, connection, someone to come home to who was actually happy to see me, not just happy about what I could provide. He met Claire's eyes. We tried for years to make it work. We went to counseling. We made promises. We kept hoping things would get better. But you can't force love where there isn't any. Eventually, we had to be honest and admit we'd made a mistake. The divorce was hard, even though it was the right thing. I spent a couple years after that pretty closed off, not wanting to risk getting hurt again. What changed? Claire asked softly. Time, therapy, realizing that being alone was better than being with the wrong person, but that didn't mean I had to stay alone forever. I started opening myself up to possibilities again, to the idea that maybe the right connection was still out there somewhere. He brushed a strand of blonde hair away from her face. And then I walked into your house today, and I saw this beautiful woman who was clearly starving for attention, for affection, for someone to actually notice her. And when I looked in your eyes, Claire, I saw someone worth knowing, someone real underneath all the polish and pretense, someone who, if she could just find the courage to be herself, would be absolutely extraordinary. Claire's tears fell freely now. You saw all that just from meeting me? I saw potential, Darius said. I saw a woman at a crossroads, whether she knew it yet or not. And yeah, I felt attracted to you. You're gorgeous, Claire, and anyone with eyes can see that. But it was more than physical. It was recognizing something in you that mirrored something in me. Two people who'd lost themselves in marriages that didn't fit, who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly wanted. He wiped her tears away with his thumbs, cradling her face gently. So, when those twins called me from the park last week, asking if I could come look at a plumbing issue, and gave me this address, something told me to take the job myself instead of sending one of my guys. I don't usually do house calls anymore. I mostly run the business side now, but something made me say yes. Call it intuition, call it fate, call it whatever you want, but I'm glad I listened to it. I'm glad you did too, Claire whispered. So that's why you, Claire, because underneath all the trappings of your perfect life, I saw someone real, someone worth knowing, someone who deserved to be reminded that she's desirable and fascinating and worthy of love. And maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe I shouldn't have crossed that line with a married woman. But I don't regret it. And I hope you don't either. I don't, Claire said firmly. I regret a lot of things. Marrying Richard, wasting 13 years, losing myself along the way. But this, today, I don't regret a single moment of it. Darius smiled and kissed her softly one more time. Good. Hold on to that when things get hard. Because they will get hard, Claire. Ending a marriage, even one that's not working, is never easy. People will judge. They'll have opinions. Some of your friends might not understand, but you have to do what's right for you, not what's comfortable for everyone else. I know, Claire said, and I will, I promise. Then he was gone, his footsteps descending the stairs, the front door opening and closing with quiet finality. Claire heard his van start up, heard the sound of it backing down her driveway and disappearing down her street, carrying him out of her life as suddenly as he'd entered it. She lay in her bed in her empty house, in her empty life, and let herself cry. Not sad tears exactly, but something more complicated. Grief for the years she'd wasted. Relief that she wasn't who she'd feared she was. Fear about what came next. Hope, tentative and fragile, that maybe her life could be something different, something more. When the tears finally subsided, Claire got up and took a long shower, washing away the evidence of the afternoon, while simultaneously trying to hold on to the feeling of being truly wanted, truly seen. She dressed in comfortable clothes, not the designer pieces she wore to impress people who didn't really see her anyway, but soft yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt she'd forgotten she still had. In her kitchen, she made herself tea and sat at the counter where just hours ago Darius had stood, where he'd first touched her face, where he'd made her a promise he'd more than kept. The house felt different now, not emptier, but somehow more honest. The silence wasn't pressing down on her anymore. It was just quiet, neutral, waiting to be filled with whatever she decided to fill it with. Claire pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long time. Richard wouldn't be back for another week. She had time to think, time to figure out what she wanted to say, how she wanted to say it. But even as she thought it, she knew the time for waiting was over. She couldn't go back to pretending. Darius had been right about that. She opened her text messages and began typing. Richard, we need to talk when you get back. Actually talk, not the polite conversations we have around our actual problems. Our marriage isn't working. I don't think it has been for years. And I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. Her finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The moment of truth. The beginning of the end. Or maybe the beginning of something new. Either way, it was honest. It was real. It was her, finally, speaking her truth. She pressed send. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared, showing Richard was typing. Claire's heart raced as she waited for his response. I know. I've known for a while. I just didn't know how to bring it up without admitting I'd failed at yet another thing. Can we talk tonight? I think I need to come clean about some things too. Claire stared at the message, her mind racing. Failed at yet another thing. What did that mean? And what did he need to come clean about? She typed back, yes, call me whenever you're free. 20 minutes later, her phone rang. Claire answered on the second ring, her hand trembling, slightly. Claire. Richard's voice sounded tired, strained in a way she'd never heard before. Thank you for being brave enough to send that text. I should have said something years ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Claire asked gently, settling into her favorite chair. Afraid of admitting that I'm not who everyone thinks I am. Afraid of disappointing my parents, my colleagues, you. Afraid of being honest about what I actually want from life. Claire heard something in his voice she'd never heard before. Vulnerability, real and raw. Richard, what's going on? There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I'm gay, Claire. I've known since college, maybe even before, but I come from a family where that's not acceptable, where being anything other than straight and successful and producing heirs is failure. So I buried it. I convinced myself I could make a traditional marriage work if I just tried hard enough. And you were perfect, beautiful, kind, from the right family. I thought maybe if I married someone like you, the other feelings would go away. Claire's breath caught. In all the scenarios she'd imagined for why their marriage felt so empty, this had never occurred to her. Oh, Richard. I'm so sorry, Claire. I'm sorry I wasted 13 years of your life. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is, you were never the problem. I was. I've been living a lie for so long. I almost convinced myself it was the truth. Tears streamed down Claire's face, but they weren't tears of anger or betrayal. They were tears of understanding, of recognition, of two people finally being honest with each other after years of pretense. Richard, I'm not angry. I mean, I am, but not at you. I'm angry that we both felt like we had to live these prescribed lives instead of being who we actually are. I'm angry that society made us both think we had to fit into boxes that didn't fit. But I'm not angry at you for being gay. I'm just sad that you felt like you had to hide it, even from yourself. There's someone, Richard admitted quietly, in Singapore. His name is James. We work together. It started innocently enough. Just friendship, mentorship. But over the past year, it's become more. I haven't acted on it, Claire. I swear I haven't cheated on you physically. But emotionally, yes. I've fallen in love with someone else. And that person happens to be a man. Claire thought about Darius, about the afternoon they'd shared, and realized she couldn't judge Richard for finding connection with someone else. I understand more than you know, she said softly. You do. Richard, I have to be honest too. Today, something happened. Someone came into my life and showed me what it feels like to be truly wanted, truly seen, and I realized I can't spend the rest of my life in a marriage where neither of us is getting what we need. There was a long silence, and then Richard laughed, a sound of relief and disbelief mixed together. So we're both ready to blow up our picture-perfect marriage for the chance at something real? I think so. Is that crazy? Probably, Richard said, but it's also the sanest thing either of us has done in years. They talked for another hour, making plans, discussing logistics, agreeing to handle the divorce as amicably as possible. They'd tell people they'd grown apart, which was true enough. They didn't owe anyone the intimate details of why their marriage had failed, only that it had, and that they were both brave enough to admit it and move forward. When they finally hung up, Claire felt exhausted but lighter than she had in years. The marriage was ending, but it felt less like a death and more like a release. Like they were both finally admitting what had been true for a long time. She picked up Darius's card and ran her finger over the embossed letters. The next 3 days passed in a strange state of suspended animation. Claire moved through her house, but it no longer felt like a prison. She'd sent the text, and Richard had responded with surprising calm, agreeing that yes, they needed to talk, that he'd been feeling the same way but hadn't known how to bring it up. That calm response told Claire everything she needed to know about the state of their marriage. He wasn't fighting for her. He wasn't rushing home early to try to save their relationship. He was relieved. They both were. She sat on charity board meetings and listened to wealthy women discuss fundraising strategies, while her mind drifted to Darius's hands on her body, his voice in her ear, the way he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in his world. She went to yoga class and felt her body differently, aware of its capacity for pleasure, for response, for being alive instead of just functional. And every night she lay in her bed and looked at the business card on her nightstand, Darius's number printed in simple black text, and wondered if she was brave enough to call. On the 4th day, her phone rang. Not Richard this time, but her best friend from college, Maya, one of the few people in her life who'd known her before she became Mrs. Richard Whitmore. "Claire, I had the strangest feeling I needed to check on you. Are you okay?" Claire surprised herself by laughing. "I'm actually more okay than I've been in years, but my life is about to get very complicated." "Tell me everything," Maya demanded, and Claire found herself doing exactly that. She told her about the plumber, about the awakening, about the honest conversation with Richard, about feeling like she was finally becoming herself again after years of pretending. Maya was quiet for a long moment after Claire finished. "So let me get this straight. Richard's gay, you've discovered you're not actually broken, and there's a hot plumber who made you remember you're a sexual being? Claire, this sounds like a romance novel." "I know," Claire said, laughing despite the weight of it all. "My life has become completely absurd." "No," Maya corrected gently. "Your life has become honest. Finally. And I'm proud of you. It takes courage to admit when something isn't working, especially after 13 years of investment. Most people just keep pretending until they're dead inside." "I was getting pretty close to that," Claire admitted. "But you're not there now, and that's what matters. So what's your next move?" Claire looked at the business card on her nightstand. "I think I'm going to call him. Darius, the plumber. Not because I need rescuing or because I'm rebounding or any of that, but because I want to see if what I felt with him was real, or if it was just the novelty of being wanted after so long." "Good," Maya said firmly. "You deserve to explore that. You deserve to figure out what actually makes you happy instead of just doing what you're supposed to do. And Claire, whatever happens, I'm here. If you need someone to vent to, someone to help you pack, someone to slash Richard's tires, I'm your girl." Claire laughed, feeling overwhelmingly grateful for this friendship that had survived years of her being too busy playing the perfect wife to nurture it properly. "I love you, Maya." "Love you too. Now go call that man and find out if he's as good at conversation as he apparently is at everything else." After they hung up, Claire sat in her living room and thought about courage, about how the bravest thing she'd ever done was admit she was unhappy, about how terrifying it was to choose differently, to step off the prescribed path and see where else it might lead. She picked up the card, and before she could overthink it, she dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "This is Darius." Just the sound of his voice made her smile. "Hi, it's Claire. Claire Whitmore." Claire. She could hear the warmth in his voice, could picture the smile on his face. "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you. I wasn't sure I'd call," she admitted. "But then I realized I wanted to. I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to tell you that you were right." "About what?" "About everything. About me being honest with myself. About my marriage. I talked to Richard. We're getting divorced. How do you feel about that?" Claire considered the question seriously. Relieved. Sad for the time we wasted. Scared about what comes next. But also hopeful. Like maybe my life can actually be mine now instead of just a role I've been playing. "That takes courage," Darius said softly. "I'm proud of you." Those simple words, that genuine pride in his voice, made Claire's eyes well up. "I was wondering if that dinner offer is still on the table. I'd like to get to know you too, the real you, not just the man who fixed my pipes and my perspective in the same afternoon." Darius laughed, rich and warm. "The offer is absolutely still on the table. When are you free?" "How about tomorrow night, if that's not too soon?" "Tomorrow night is perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. And Claire, wear something comfortable, something that makes you feel like yourself. Not whoever you think you're supposed to be, just you." "I can do that," Claire said, smiling. "I think I'm finally figuring out who that is." After they hung up, Claire walked through her house, looking at it with new eyes. Tomorrow she'd start the process of separating her life from Richard's, of building something new from the foundation of honesty instead of pretense. It would be messy. It would be complicated. People would talk, would judge, would have opinions about her choices. But standing here in the golden light of evening, feeling more herself than she had in 13 years, Claire found she didn't care what they thought. She'd spent 13 years in a marriage that didn't feed her soul. 13 years being polite and appropriate and slowly dying inside. 13 years learning what it felt like to be invisible in her own life. But Darius had changed what that number meant. 13 wasn't unlucky anymore. It was the number of times someone had shown her she was desirable, responsive, alive. It was the number that marked the boundary between her old life and whatever came next. And as she stood in her kitchen, in the spot where everything had changed, Claire raised her teacup in a silent toast to new beginnings, to honest endings, to the courage to choose differently. The restaurant Darius chose wasn't what Claire expected, not the stuffy country club establishments where she'd attended countless charity dinners with Richard, but a small, family-owned Italian place tucked into a neighborhood she'd never explored. The kind of place where the owner knew every customer by name, where laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk, where the aroma of garlic and fresh bread made her mouth water before she even walked through the door. Darius stood as she entered, and the smile that lit his face made her heart skip. He wore dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes. He looked comfortable, confident, completely at ease in his own skin, in a way that Claire envied and admired. "You look beautiful," he said as she approached, pulling out her chair. "And comfortable. That's good." Claire glanced down at her simple sundress and sandals, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of styled into her usual perfect wave. "I took your advice. This is me. Or at least who I think I am when I'm not trying to be Mrs. Richard Whitmore." They ordered wine and appetizers, and as the evening unfolded, Claire discovered things about Darius she never would have guessed. He'd served in the Marines before learning plumbing from his father. He volunteered at a youth center, teaching kids basic home repair skills. He loved jazz music and terrible action movies. He had a younger sister who taught 3rd grade and a mother who'd raised 3 kids alone after his father died. "Tell me about your family," Claire said, genuinely curious. "Your mother sounds incredible." "She is," Darius said with obvious affection. "She cleaned houses for 20 years to put me and my siblings through school. Never complained, never let us think we were any less than anyone else because we had less money. She taught us that dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you carry yourself and how you treat others." "She'd probably hate me," Claire said quietly. "I'm everything she worked so hard to overcome. Privileged, wealthy, never had to struggle for anything." Darius shook his head. "My mother doesn't hate anyone for their circumstances. She judges people by their character and their choices. And you, Claire, you're choosing to be honest, to be brave, to not settle for a life that doesn't fit you. She'd respect that." The conversation flowed naturally, easily, touching on everything from books to politics to childhood memories. Claire found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself sharing stories about her own upbringing, the wealthy but cold household, parents who viewed her as an asset to be married off well, the way she'd learned early that appearances mattered more than feelings. "That's why it was so easy to marry Richard," she realized aloud. "He fit the script my parents had written for me. Successful, from a good family, someone who'd look right next to me in family photos. I don't think I ever asked myself if he made me happy. I just asked if he was appropriate." "And now," Darius asked gently, "now I'm learning to ask different questions. Like, what do I actually want? What makes me feel alive? What kind of life do I want to build instead of just accepting the one that was handed to me?" "Those are good questions," Darius said. "You got any answers yet?" Claire looked at him across the candlelit table, this man who'd walked into her life and somehow cracked open all the locked doors she'd been hiding behind. "Some. I know I want honesty. I know I want to feel like myself instead of performing a role. I know I want to be with people who see me, really see me, instead of just seeing what they want me to be." She paused, gathering courage. "And I know I want to keep getting to know you. Is that okay? I know this is all happening fast. I know I'm still technically married, still figuring out who I am. But I don't want this to be just one perfect day that I look back on. I want to see where this goes." Darius reached across the table and took her hand. "Claire, I would love to keep getting to know you, but I need you to understand something. I'm not going to be your rebound or your escape plan or your way of rebelling against your old life. If we're going to do this, if we're going to see where this goes, it needs to be because you genuinely want me. Not because I'm different from Richard, but because you like who I am." "I do like who you are," Claire said firmly. "You're kind and genuine, and you see people, really see them. You looked at me like I mattered when I'd forgotten what that felt like. And yes, maybe the timing is complicated and messy, but that doesn't make what I feel any less real." Darius squeezed her hand gently. "Okay then, we'll take this slow. Let you figure out your life without rushing into anything. We'll have dinners like this, get to know each other, build something real instead of just acting on attraction and chemistry." "Even though the attraction and chemistry are really, really good," Claire asked with a small smile. "Especially because of that," Darius said with a grin. "Because I want this to be more than just physical. I want to know what makes you laugh, what scares you, what you dream about when you let yourself dream. I want to hear about your terrible taste in reality TV shows." "How did you know about that?" Claire interrupted, laughing. Lucky guess. I want to meet your friends if you have any real ones under all those country club acquaintances. I want to know what you're like when you're not performing for anyone. That's what I want to build with you, Claire. Something real, something honest, something that can last beyond one incredible afternoon. Claire felt her eyes well up. No one's ever wanted to know those things about me before. Richard certainly never asked. Then Richard was a fool, Darius said simply. Because you're fascinating, Claire Whitmore, and I intend to spend as much time as you'll give me discovering just how fascinating you are. They finished their dinner, talking and laughing and discovering each other, and when Darius drove her home, he walked her to her door like a perfect gentleman. He kissed her softly, sweetly, a kiss that promised more but didn't demand it, a kiss that said, "We have time." "Thank you," Claire said when they pulled apart, "for tonight, for seeing me, for being patient while I figure out my life." "Thank you for calling," Darius replied, "for being brave enough to reach out, to try something new, to let yourself want something different." As Claire watched him drive away, she realized that the number 13 had taken on yet another meaning. 13 was how old she'd been when she first learned to hide her true self behind a mask of propriety and good behavior. 13 years she'd been married to the wrong man. And now, standing on the threshold of a new life, 13 felt like the lucky number that had brought Darius into her world at exactly the moment she needed him most. Inside her house, not empty anymore, just quiet, Claire made herself tea and sat in her favorite chair, the one by the window where she could watch the stars come out. She thought about the woman she'd been just days ago, lonely and invisible and slowly fading away. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, brave enough to be honest, strong enough to choose differently, open enough to let someone truly see her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Divorce proceedings, difficult conversations, judgment from people who thought they knew her story. But for the first time in 13 years, Claire felt like she was finally writing her own story instead of living in someone else's script. And when her phone buzzed with a text from Darius, "Sleep well, beautiful. Can't wait to hear what adventure you're planning for us next," Claire smiled and realized that whatever came next, she was finally truly ready to live it. Not as Mrs. Richard Whitmore, trapped in a life that never fit, but as Claire. Just Claire. And that was exactly who she was meant to be. 6 months later, Claire stood in the same kitchen where everything had changed, but now it truly felt like hers. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, amicable and honest in ways that surprised everyone who knew them. Richard had moved to Singapore to be with James, and from the photos he'd sent, he looked happier than Claire had ever seen him. Darius came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "About how one ordinary Tuesday morning I called a plumber and my whole life changed. About how the number 13 used to mean bad luck, and now it means the day I finally started living honestly." "You give me too much credit," Darius said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're the one who had the courage to choose differently." "Maybe," Claire said, turning in his arms to face him. "But you showed me what was possible. You reminded me that I deserve to be seen, to be wanted, to be loved for who I actually am instead of who I was trying to be." "And who are you, Claire?" Darius asked, even though by now he knew the answer. Claire smiled, feeling more herself than she ever had in her life. "I'm someone who's finally figured out that the only person I need to be good enough for is myself. I'm someone who's learning that happiness isn't about having a perfect life. It's about having an honest one. And I'm someone who's incredibly grateful that her pipes leaked on exactly the right day. Darius laughed and pulled her closer. Best plumbing emergency I ever responded to. As they stood together in the kitchen where everything had changed, where Claire had taken her first real steps toward an authentic life, she thought about how far she'd come. From the invisible wife in the too big house, to the woman who knew her own worth, who chose her own path, who loved and was loved in return with honesty and intention. The number 13 would always hold a special place in her heart now. Not as bad luck, but as the number of times someone had shown her she was worthy of desire, worthy of attention, worthy of love. The number that had marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. And as Darius kissed her in the golden afternoon light, Claire knew that she would never again settle for anything less than being fully, authentically, beautifully herself.